This is Unit 7, Creating Resilient Communities, Part 2. This is your instructor, Dr. John Rennie. The unit objectives for this week is to determine goals and objectives for community resilience, explain plan development for community resilience, explain plan preparation, review, and approval, and to explain plan implementation and maintenance. In order not to get behind in this class, you should have completed all requirements for Units 1 through 5, and you should have completed the midterm exam. Going into the readings for this week, Community Resilience, we're covering the second half of the chapters from this report from NIST, and just to remind you about the 6-step process to planning for community resilience. Number 1 is to form a collaborative planning team. Number 2 is to understand the situation. 3 is to determine goals and objectives. 4 is plan development. 5 is plan preparation and review and approval. And 6 is plan implementation and maintenance. The first 2 steps, which were from the last unit before the midterm, was detailed about forming a collaborative planning team and understanding the situation. I'm not going to go into those since we've already covered them. But this week we're focusing on chapters 4, 5, 6, and 7, determining goals and objectives, plan development, plan preparation, review, and approval, and plan implementation and maintenance. So, for determining goals and objectives, there are long-term community goals that need to be established. They need to establish desired recovery performance goals for the built environment at the community level based on social needs, dependencies, and cascading effects between systems. As we need to define community hazards and levels, determining adequate anticipated performance during and after a hazard event to support social functions and summarize the results. In the plan development phase, we want to evaluate gaps between desired and anticipated performance of the built environment to improve community resilience and summarize the results. Then to identify solutions to address gaps, including both administrative and construction options, and then prioritizing solutions and developing an implementation strategy. Under the plan preparation, review, and approval, we need to document the community plan and implementation strategy, obtain feedback and approval from stakeholders and community, and to finalize and approve the plan. And under the plan implementation and maintenance, the execute, approval, administrative, and construction solutions, evaluate and update on a periodic basis the plan, and modify short and long-term implementation strategy to achieve performance goals as needed. So I want you to keep all this in mind as you're watching the media, and you'll be able to really think about how can we do a better job promoting community resilience if we can implement all of the best practices that this NIST report recommends. So, this National Disaster Recovery Framework will be implemented, the short-term recovery, which takes days. Then there will be the intermediate, which will be within weeks and months. And then there will be the long-term recovery, which is measured in the time scale of months and years. And I think we already covered this diagram. There's also that resilience diagram that we looked at in Unit 5, so I encourage you to go back and take a look at that. And that resilience triangle, so when the disaster strikes, and then functionality decreases. Now we're in the phase of trying to bring functionality back up to where it was before the disaster struck. Because we're constantly facing these natural and in some cases man-made disasters. It seems like almost on a continual basis somewhere in this big country of ours. So this is from Chapter 4, performance level definitions for building clusters. So when you take a look at building facilities and infrastructure systems, they can be rated based on A, safe and operational, B, safe and usable during repair, C, safe and not usable, or D, unsafe, partial, or complete collapse. So this is a rating system that is used to take a look at the damage after a disaster, or even could be used pre-disaster to anticipate what sort of damage could occur using modeling capabilities. We do have the ability to model disaster and impacts, but certainly this is very much applicable to a post-disaster scenario of what we're experiencing now. And here are some sample assignment of building clusters by functional category and recovery phases. In the short term, critical facilities include disaster debris and recycling center, emergency operations centers, hospitals and essential healthcare facilities, and police and fire stations. And then also kind of in the short term under emergency housing, you have animal shelters. A point that I'd like to make is that Palm Beach County's shelters for animals filled up. So for human capacity. So humans can go to a shelter with their pets, but the animal shelters in Palm Beach County filled up. So that's a problem. I mean, the storm didn't hit us severely, but people may have chosen not to evacuate to the shelters in Palm Beach County because they were reporting before Hurricane Matthew struck that they filled up for human capacity. So people in vulnerable flood-prone areas may have said, I'm not leaving my pet behind, and I'm going to stay and take that chance because I don't want to leave my pet home alone. And that's a problem. That's something that we need to address in Palm Beach County. Also, banking facilities, food distribution centers, faith and community-based organizations, gas stations, a lot of gas stations ran out of gas, nursing homes, public shelters, residential shelter in place, shelter for emergency response and recovery workers. And then in the intermediate phase, we have housing, neighborhoods, and businesses, looking at all these different categories under that category. And then in the long-term community recovery, we have commercial and industrial businesses that need to come back, non-emergency city services, resilient landscape repair, redesign, reconstruction, repairs to domestic environment. That point is important because we can rebuild and recover, and even when we haven't really been devastated, we can make our water drainage, landscaping, our transportation infrastructure that ties in with water drainage and public lands and landscaping much more resilient to serve as water detention basins and to channel stormwater runoff into public areas that are not used as well, as opposed to flooding people's homes. And that this is very much a structural hazard mitigation type of a response for resilience, which is an important part of the story. The plan development phase, planners need to evaluate gaps between desired and anticipated performance. They need to identify potential solutions to address gaps. That includes potential administrative solutions and potential construction solutions. And planners need to prioritize potential solutions and develop implementation strategy. This is really the outline for the chapter on plan development. So be sure to go in there and read all the details underneath this. The readings this week is actually pretty small. There's not a lot of pages for you to read. So I really encourage you and expect that you go and read a lot of the details under each one of these. Under plan preparation, we need to keep language simple and clear by writing in plain English. This doesn't have to be some sort of high technical jargon that only planners and emergency managers can understand. Don't use acronyms when developing your plans. Or if you do use some acronyms, make sure you have a glossary right at the very front of the document so people know what your acronyms mean. But I encourage you when writing plans to avoid the use of acronyms. Too many planners and public officials get so wrapped up in acronyms that they often lose that understandability from the general public and even people in other disciplines. If you're from a military background, you may have a set of acronyms that may be different than folks who work in urban planning, which could be different than the folks that work in public administration and emergency management. So Acronyms often can be a barrier, so write in plain, simple, easy to understand English and avoid acronyms. Summarize important information with checklists, visual aids such as maps and flowcharts. We've seen a lot of that in these documents from NIST and the Jim Schwab reading, so use that as an example. Avoid use of jargon, I mentioned that already, and minimize use of acronyms. Provide enough detail to convey an easily understood plan that is actionable. Under review and approval, and there's the plan implementation and maintenance, and the NIST report really does a good job of detailing what all that means. Remember, implementation also requires continued active outreach and communication with the stakeholders involved in the plan's development and adoption, with the broader community through a variety of mechanisms. Always keep this in mind. As sophisticated models evolve from idea to prototype to application, they become more practical and approachable for practicing professionals who must often make rapid decisions with limited data availability. Sometimes too technical, too complicated is not good. We can put all the models in the world together that we want. We can use the most sophisticated computer software, which a lot of consultants and academics use. But at the end of the day, our plans need to be practical and approachable so practicing professionals can use them to make rapid decisions with limited data availability, which often occurs during hazard and disaster situations. So that's very, very important. So with that, that's the end of the Unit 7 lecture. I want to thank you. Next unit is going to be Evacuation Planning Part 1.